On the other hand, private pacifism is quite honorable, both Christianly and commonsensically, and more than honorable. To sacrifice yourself for others, especially unworthy others, is the very thing God himself did for us, and just about the most distinctively Christian thing we could possibly do in this world. It is what agape means most concretely. The complete Christian is the martyr, and so is even the perfect pagan, since pagan ethics rises much higher into Christian ethics than pagan theology rises into Christian theology. Christ and Socrates are the two most influential moral models in Western history, and both modeled private pacifism and martyrdom. So there must be a double standard after all. Individuals must be called to heroic virtue, but the state cannot expect it or practice it. Individuals must live by charity, but the state must live by justice. For individuals to live by justice alone is all too possible, alas, but it is inhuman Phariseeism. But for states to live by charity is impossible and is romantic sentimentalism. The family and the church are the only two communities that can live by charity instead of justice. And it is no accident that the political left, which sometimes demand that the state live by charity instead of justice, is usually suspicious of both the family and the church. Naturally, for they are the state's two great rivals in the thought of the left, as they are not rivals to the state in the thought of political conservatives. This is true both of the Marxist left and the liberal left. The Marxist left's social substitute for justice, at least in theory or in propaganda, is from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, and that is precisely the principle of the family. The liberal left's social substitute for justice is the welfare state, and that is precisely the principle of the church. One wing of the political right, namely the hard-nosed, individualistic, libertarian Ayn Rand right, is also suspicious of the church and the family, since both of them are based on an irrational bleeding heart charity. This wing of the right wants to universalize the hard-nosed rational justice of the state, as the left wants to universalize the bleeding heart charity of the family or the church. In addition to these philosophical arguments against the teleological state, there are also historical ones, reasons that come from our historical experience. One of these is the very obvious and simple fact that most modern Western states no longer have consensus on first things. Perhaps this fact is an occasion for lamenting, perhaps it is an occasion for rejoicing, but it is a fact in any case. Modern Western societies are pluralist to the core, not just about politics, but about philosophy and religion, about first things, about the ultimate meaning of life. Let's take this fact as premise one, and join it now with premise two, which is our newly sensitive respect for the convictions of all, including minorities, including religious and philosophical minorities, dissenters from the majority's summum bonum. And most of us are agreed that this second premise, at least, is an occasion for rejoicing, not lamenting. Well, if we put these two premises together, you get an argument for the conclusion that the state should not take a stand on first things. There are at least four historical reasons or historical causes for the first premise of this argument in turn, namely, causes for the fact of pluralism. And these four historical causes seem to show that we should not lament, but rejoice in pluralism. I shall take them in reverse chronological order. First and most recently, the American system of the separation of church and state has proved much healthier for the church, as well as for the state, than the European system of state-supported churches. Churches have always gotten fat, lazy, miserable, bored, boring, and corrupt when they went to bed with states, like innocent young girls seduced by macho men. Compare the health of Christianity in Europe and in America. The contrasting results of this double experiment are dramatic. A second, earlier cause of pluralism, another obvious one, was the rise of nationalism, with the dissolving of Christendom into large sovereign nation-states. A greater political pluralism afforded material opportunities for religious pluralism, different houses for different religions to live in, Presbyterianism in Scotland, Anglicanism in England, Catholicism in Spain, Calvinism in Holland, etc. A third and more basic cause, both earlier and more important, was the breakdown of the medieval Christian consensus that was Christendom, the loss of a single faith, due to the Protestant Reformation, which occasioned many of the wars and most of the worst wars and all of the religious wars in the history of our civilization. The traumatization caused by religious wars, especially the 30 Years' War, was one of the deepest causes behind Enlightenment secularism, secular states, and non-teleological societies, as the Peace of Westphalia's solution to the problem of religious wars. Finally, the deepest and earliest cause of pluralism was the cause we have just noted, that is, the cause of the breakdown of Christendom, and this was the weakening of the faith, which in the Middle Ages had held Christendom together. The external, visible causes of this weakening, such as nationalism and the Reformation, were only catalysts. The real causes were internal, spiritual, supernatural, and invisible, and therefore impossible for the historian, qua historian, to demonstrate, though not impossible to see, if the historian has a full set of human eyes and not merely the eyes of a scientific historian. These spiritual causes, I think, were mainly three. First, there was the temptation of Renaissance worldliness, a prioritizing of nature over supernature, man over God, and this world over the next, now that the first of these pairs, the natural, was again being restored. And this was a violation of Lewis's principle of first and second things. Second, there was the unfortunate and wholly unnecessary science versus theology wars, often mislabeled science versus religion wars, which centered on Galileo's astronomy then as they center on Darwin's biology now. And third, there was the lure of technology and the Baconian dream of creating heaven on earth, the substitution of a new kind of summum bonum, a this-worldly and purely human one, for the first time in history. Perhaps this was the most potent cause of all, since practice moves us more than theory, desire more than explanation, heart more than head. In The Abolition of Man, Lewis defines this radical change as follows, in a sentence that, to my mind, is unsurpassed in identifying the single most distinctive feature of modern Western civilization. He first points out that magic and technology arose at the same time, not in the Middle Ages, but in the early modern era, and then identifies the common philosophical source of both magic and technology as nothing less than a new first thing, a new summum bonum. He writes, "For all previous civilizations, the cardinal problem of human life had been how to conform the soul to objective reality, and the solution had been wisdom, self-discipline, and virtue. For magic and applied science alike, the cardinal problem is how to conform objective reality to the wishes of the human soul, and the solution is a technique." For objective reality meant, to all pre-modern civilizations, something more than the material world. It meant God, or the gods, or the sacred ancestors, or the sacred tradition. And it is simply silly to try to conform that to your wishes. That would be like a rabbit trying to tame a lion. But objective reality changed its meaning in modern times. It began to mean, and increasingly meant, only the material cosmos. Thus, the spiritual and the religious and the metaphysical and even the moral became more and more subjectivized and became the object of increasing skepticism. And once objective reality was reduced to matter, it could no longer be a standard. It is as silly to conform yourself to the material world of sticks and stones as it is to try to conform God to yourself.